Welcome to Sleeping Radio Channel. Tonight we will enter a rain-soaked night in Samarkand and follow a story where science touched a forbidden silence. It is the story of a scientific mistake that seemed to open the gates of hell, and of a grave that held a secret no one dared to disturb. In this tale a lock of time was broken in the storm, and something old seemed to awaken. And in the shadow of that awakening, the demons of war rose across Europe, as if the past had reached forward and pulled the future by the throat. Why did Stalin insist on opening the tomb of the terrifying conqueror at such a sensitive moment? What exact words were found carved on jade, words that made the hands of the researchers tremble? Who were the three mysterious elders who appeared without warning, to tell the expedition that tomorrow would be filled with blood? How did engines stall and lights go out at the exact moment the lid was lifted from the remains? Was it only coincidence that Nazi forces crossed Soviet borders only hours after the tomb was disturbed? What strange incense-like scent rose from the coffin and left the team stunned? How did the skull of the commander become a talisman carried in a war plane over the sky of Stalingrad? And why did the Kremlin itself supervise a secret religious reburial as if the state feared something it could not name? Was pouring lead and mortar over the tomb enough to stop the curse once it began? And what did the cameraman Malik Kayumov see through his lens that made him stay silent for so many years? This is the story where science stood helpless before a prophecy. It is the moment when the terror of the past met the iron power of the present. It is the tale of the grave that shook thrones and set fire to the fuse of the Second World War. The curse of Samarkand when Timur stirred. And before we begin, write in the comments which country you're watching from and what you suggest for the next video. The story of opening the tomb of the Mongol commander Timur is one of the strangest events where fear, politics, and total war seem to overlap. It began when the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin ordered a scientific expedition to Samarkand in the Uzbek Soviet Republic to open the Gur Emir Mausoleum, and this happened in June 1941. The expedition included leading scientists, among them the anatomist and reconstruction expert Mikhail Gerasimov. Stalin wanted to prove the historic greatness of Soviet peoples, and he wanted Gerasimov to rebuild Timur's face using the structure of his skull. When the team arrived at the mausoleum, they met strong resistance from elders in Samarkand who warned that a global disaster would follow. The expedition cameraman, Malik Kayumov, later said he met three elders in a nearby tea house, carrying an old book that warned against opening the tomb. The elders said the book contained a message: "Whoever opens my grave will unleash an invader more terrifying than I was." But the scientists mocked the warning and treated it like folklore spoken by frightened old men. On June 19, 1941, workers began removing the massive slab of green jade that sealed the grave. When the tomb was opened, a powerful smell of incense and herbs rose into the air, heavy and strange, and it filled the chamber. Inside they found writing that confirmed the warning, saying that if this place was disturbed, the world would shake. And then, only 3 days later, on June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched its violent assault on the Soviet Union. This operation was called Barbarossa, and it became the beginning of some of the bloodiest battles in human history. And so the rumor of a curse spread like fire, because the timing fell too sharp to ignore. The remains of Timur stayed away from his tomb for about a year and a half. During that time, the text says the Soviets suffered terrible defeats and millions died, and the fear of the curse grew stronger. Kayumov told General Zhukov the story, and Zhukov passed it to Stalin. And Stalin, who preferred cold reason, began to bend under pressure, and finally ordered the remains to be returned at once. In November 1942, Timur was reburied in Samarkand with full Islamic rites to calm the situation. And the story says what truly amazed people was that the Battle of Stalingrad, the turning point of the war, ended in Soviet victory only days after the reburial. Historians are named in the text as witnesses to this timeline, and the narrative insists the dates are extremely precise. And it says that such a coincidence is not easy to explain, at least not for those who believe in the idea of a curse. After the coffin was opened and the prophecy seemed to awaken through invasion, the scientists moved the remains to Moscow under heavy guard. Gerasimov worked day and night in his laboratory, while the sound of German guns seemed to crawl closer to the borders of the capital. He examined the skull with intense care and concluded that Timur had a strong build and an unusual height for his era. From the bones of the leg, he found evidence of an old injury to the right knee that would have caused a limp. Confirming the famous name, Timur the Lame, the reconstruction took long months. Gerasimov shaped the features according to the contours of bone, until the face emerged with narrow eyes and a sharp gaze, a face that looked like a ruler who never learned mercy. Meanwhile, wave after wave of Soviet soldiers were crushed across the front lines, and among officers a quiet belief grew that ancient anger was part of the storm. Kayumov traveled to the front and spoke with Zhukov again, insisting that the remains must be returned if the bleeding was ever to stop. The message reached Stalin, who resisted superstition, but under the weight of defeat he decided to retreat from his own decision. He ordered a special aircraft to carry the box of bones, to fly with it over the battle zones before the final burial. And the plane passed above Stalingrad when the city was collapsing under the siege of the German Sixth Army. Then, in a solemn scene, the remains were placed back into the earth in Samarkand, and the mausoleum was sealed tightly so no one could disturb it again. Only days after the burial, the balance of war shifted. The Soviets launched a counterattack. Thousands of German soldiers were captured, and Field Marshal Paulus surrendered. The text cites local sources saying people in Samarkand celebrated the closing of the tomb more than they celebrated the New Year. And it says many Russian writers later saw the timing of victory as a shock, even to those who doubted hidden forces. It did not end with burial and victory, the story says. The scientific expedition began documenting every moment inside the dark corridors of the mausoleum in those rainy nights when fear clung to stone. Gerasimov wrote in private notes that the body was not only dry bones, but carried traces of tissue preserved by time. The rare aromas within the tomb and the condition of the remains left the team unsettled, as if the dead had been prepared to resist the living. They found fractures that had healed, signs of a life built from war and pain, and a body that had endured. And Kayumov told cultural circles in Tashkent that the Soviet scientists trembled when electric lamps suddenly broke. Inside the grave chamber, they photographed the remains with X-rays after moving them to Moscow, and they described deep-set eyes and a strict skull shape, reinforcing the image of a harsh personality. The Soviet press spoke carefully and indirectly, using the event to praise Central Asian history and to win local support for the war effort. Some rare sources in the text say Stalin even ordered a large budget to restore the Gur Emir mausoleum after the burial, as if it was an apology offered to time itself. Samarkand residents shared stories of ghostly Mongol shadows guarding the city in the nights after the tomb was sealed with concrete. And the narrative says the curse was not aimed at one person, but was a warning from the past, telling the present not to awaken the buried demons of war. After the Second World War, Gerasimov became one of the most famous anthropologists in the world, because the reconstruction of Timur's face was remembered everywhere. But the story says his fame was stained by what began as scientific curiosity and ended in a cosmic catastrophe. Research continued on fabrics and artifacts taken from the burial, and it says they found gold-embroidered clothing and silk threads that had survived the damp soil in surprising condition. The text claims that even Hitler knew about the story and believed the prophecy pointed to him as the invader. But it says the winds turned against the Nazi path, and the snow and brutal cold became loyal soldiers for the old empire Timur once ruled. Every year, thousands of tourists visit the site and stand before the cracked jade stone, and they remember the idea that some secrets beneath earth should never be touched. The narrative says Soviet authorities tried to keep the story quiet after the tomb was closed. Stalin feared belief in unseen forces might weaken the materialist communist doctrine that held the state together. Yet secret reports kept in intelligence archives held details that could not easily be ignored. Some companions said Gerasimov suffered chronic nightmares for months, seeing armies of shadows stretching from Samarkand to Moscow. They studied the golden painted inscriptions inside the mausoleum, made with chemical mixtures that preserve shine for centuries. The tomb, the text says, was built so that wind passing through openings could produce a whistling sound like human screams. During the war, some soldiers whispered that the spirit of the great commander had risen to punish those who disturbed his rest. And the story says Stalin ordered secret prayers and religious ceremonies before the reburial to calm public feeling. The original goal for opening the tomb is described as a state celebration linked to a cultural anniversary. But the celebration turned into a global mourning, and the rain in Samarkand seemed to become part of the memory. The text says Timur himself believed his authority would extend beyond death, to protect his lands even after his body returned to dust. Inside the coffin, they found seeds and rare herbs that still held their properties, and this astonished botanists in Leningrad. The preservation, as the story describes it, was not a simple burial. It was a method that blended Islamic practice with older Mongol shaman traditions, designed to keep the body enduring through time. After Gerasimov finished the facial reconstruction, he made a bust that still exists today, showing the harsh features of the man who built pyramids from the skulls of enemies. And Shukr Salikov is mentioned as saying that anyone who touched the coffin later suffered misfortune in work or personal life, which deepened the isolation around the tomb. Documents say Stalin allocated 1,000,000 rubles, an enormous amount for that era, to decorate the Gur Emir tomb with the finest marble. The story frames this as a peace treaty between the modern ruler of Russia and the ancient master of the East, meant to stop the devouring war. Reports also speak of an elegant underground drainage system around the mausoleum, built to prevent moisture from destroying the bones across centuries. This engineering precision, the text says, reflects the advancement of Timurid civilization and their reverence for death and for the endurance of legacy. Fear of opening the grave was not limited to the Soviet side. The story claims it reached the ears of Nazi intelligence officers who were fascinated by the occult and by unusual powers. It says Hitler believed there were hidden links among the bloodlines of great leaders, and that disturbing the tomb was a cosmic signal to begin the assault. In Samarkand, the city fell into a silent grief and deep fear after the expedition departed with the body to the north. Local accounts gathered by Ahmed Rashid are mentioned, saying the sky on the night of transfer turned a crimson red, taken as an omen. And while Gerasimov worked on the skull in Moscow, he noticed a small hole in the temporal bone, suggesting an old injury or a primitive surgery. These details convinced the scientists that they were not dealing with a legend alone, but with a warrior shaped by constant battle. The text also says Stalin, in moments of despair, met secretly with religious men and historians to ask how the spirit of Timur might be appeased. Military reports kept arriving at the Kremlin with news of retreat and collapse, and the narrative describes it as if an invisible hand pushed them toward the abyss. So the plan to return the remains was carried out with strict military precision. The box was transported in an artillery wagon covered with the finest Uzbek silk as a sign of respect. Before the plane took off, restorers cleaned the bones with special materials to prevent damage after the controlled laboratory environment. The aircraft hovered above the lines of fire at a moment when smoke covered the ground like a dark sea, and the story even claims the flames seemed to soften slightly as the plane passed, as if the air itself listened. After the reburial in December, the Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, which surrounded the German Sixth Army inside Stalingrad. Uzbek sources are cited as saying that under Timur's head they found a pillow stuffed with rare herbs that do not grow except in distant Himalayan regions. These herbs released scents that discouraged insects and microbes and helped preserve the coffin made of shell and ebony. Sarianidi is mentioned again, saying the inscription on the tomb was not only a warning, but a kind of star map that linked the movement of heavens to the moment the grave would be opened. Timur, the story says, believed strongly in astrology, and his court astrologers chose the site as a fortress for his spirit until the last day. Decades later, Malik Kayumov revealed in a television interview before his death that the fear he saw in the scientist's eyes was beyond description. He said the book carried by the three elders was a rare manuscript from the 10th century, containing detailed hints of what would happen to the world. After that, the state protected the mausoleum with modern cooling systems, ensuring the grave would never again be opened for any scientific reason. Timur remains, in the eyes of his people, a national hero who defended identity, and in the eyes of the world, a historical mystery tied to the greatest disasters of the modern era. Before the Soviet expedition arrived, Samarkand lived in a deceptive calm, its old markets full of stories and legends passed from grandparents to children. The residents never imagined that strangers would come to violate the sanctity of the place they considered the beating heart of the world. Soviet authorities surrounded the Gur Emir with excavation platforms and heavy filming equipment, while elders watched with bitter silence. Some witnesses said the birds that lived in the blue domes abandoned their nests the moment the pounding began. Ivan Kovalev is mentioned as saying the scientists faced mechanical failures that made no sense. Cranes stalled again and again without clear technical cause. Gerasimov insisted the mission continue, believing science did not recognize superstition. But the looks of Malik Kiyumov carried worry, especially after the warning from the elders. When the incense smell burst from the coffin, some workers felt severe dizziness, and one was said to collapse from shock. After the remains were taken to Moscow, life in Samarkand did not return to normal, and war news arrived like heavy footsteps, confirming the prophecy in the minds of many. The text says, Timur had ordered large quantities of salt and preservative substances placed at the base of the grave to dry moisture completely. This technique allowed scientists to see the color of his beard hair, which leaned toward a reddish tone, surprising those who expected a different appearance. After the war, the Soviet government tried to erase the story from official records to avoid embarrassing science before curses. Yet Malik Kiyumov later wrote a book revealing side conversations between scientists and Stalin in closed rooms, and he said Stalin sent a secret messenger asking about the warning text in the elder's manuscript. The message, as the story tells it, was clear. The world would drown in blood if the skull did not return before winter ended. Shuka Salikov is named again, describing the reburial as a ritual act involving engineers, soldiers, and even disguised religious men. Layers of melted lead were poured above the coffin to prevent it from ever being opened again. This left a deep imprint on Russian memory, and it made people treat historical graves in Central Asia with fear and respect. Even today, the text says, when sandstorms rise in Samarkand, people whisper that Timur's spirit still watches over the buried secrets of his kingdom. And it repeats that Hitler was obsessed with legendary stories and hidden powers, and that he received news of the curse through intelligence channels that monitored the Soviet interior. He took the disturbance of Timur's tomb as a sign to begin his great campaign, to crush both the old empire and the new ideology. Meanwhile, Gerasimov measured the spine and numbered the vertebrae, finding evidence of chronic pain from endless horseback riding, proof of mental toughness that carried him from China to the edge of Europe. The story says that after the reburial, Stalin became calmer and more confident in victory, as if a spiritual weight had lifted from the state. Factories behind the Ural Mountains roared with energy, and tanks rolled out, striking the myth of the invincible German army. The mausoleum walls were reinforced with a mixture of plaster and volcanic ash to block moisture and protect the marble. After the second sealing, workers sang prayers and folk chants to drive away what they believed had been released when the box was opened. After the war, Malik Kiyumov was promoted in documentary cinema, yet he avoided speaking openly about what he saw inside the tomb for decades. In his final years, the story claims he believed the incense was not only perfume, but carried a numbing effect that made people see scenes from the past. Victor Sarianidi is mentioned as saying Stalin visited Samarkand after the war in an unofficial way, standing before the grave in long silence. It is described as if the Soviet leader offered a final thanks to the conqueror, who helped, in a mysterious way, drive the invasion back from the gates of Moscow. In the expedition archives, there were photographs never published, showing cracks in the floor of the lower chamber like carved magical symbols. The text says these symbols represented degrees of the sky and the positions of stars on the night Timur died, revealing the depth of astronomical knowledge in that era. The curse became rich material for films and novels because it embodied the eternal struggle between cold logic and the mystery of fate. and the moment the marble lid was raised remained a dividing line in memory, as if a gate had opened over humanity for 4 years. The text continues by saying that Timur had engraved words on his sword, declaring that justice was the foundation of rule. But his justice was a blend of blood and order, and it was this harsh balance that Stalin later tried to understand and imitate, while rebuilding the Soviet Empire after the war. After Gerasimov completed the examination of the bones, the most astonishing phase began, the reconstruction of the face. Using special clay and precise measurements of the skull, he slowly revealed features that matched the legend, brutal Mongol sharpness mixed with calculated intelligence. As he worked, slicing clay along eye sockets and cheekbones, the face that emerged seemed to watch him back. The story says this was the moment Gerasimov realized he was not shaping a man, but awakening a presence preserved by centuries of intention. Local manuscripts discovered later spoke of a secret testament left by Timur. It claimed unseen guardians were bound to his body, placed there by astrologers and sorcerers of the court to protect his rest. According to these accounts, numerical talismans were carved into the underground walls to cloud the mind of any intruder. Ahmed Rashid is cited as saying the aircraft that carried the remains was not an ordinary military plane, but one whose interior was painted with symbols and protective verses. Pilots later reported hearing the sound of horses and distant battle cries echoing inside the cabin. This happened while flying at great altitude far above clouds, with no logical source for such sounds. After the victory at Stalingrad, Stalin's attitude toward archaeologists changed completely. He ordered them never to approach another Timurid grave, fearing a repeat of the destruction the world had just endured. Documents from the Samarkand library suggest that the tomb held more than gold or jewelry. It also contained medical and astronomical records far ahead of their time, kept close to the ruler even in death. Chemical substances similar to mercury were found in hidden channels beneath the coffin. These were meant to create a magnetic field that would deter thieves and preserve the body from decay. Malik Kayumov later wrote that the 3 elders who warned the expedition vanished completely after that night. No records of them could be found anywhere in Uzbekistan, as if they had stepped out of time itself. After Germany's surrender in 1945, strict orders were issued to seal all files related to the Samarkand expedition. They were locked in steel containers and buried deep within intelligence archives. For decades, only fragments of the story survived in whispers. It was not until the collapse of the Soviet Union that more information began to surface. Restorers who entered the tomb in the 1990s claimed the interior markings had changed. New symbols appeared where none had been before, reinforcing the belief that the site was not static, but alive. This led authorities to classify the mausoleum as a protected spiritual and historical zone. It became surrounded by an aura of reverence mixed with controlled fear. Timur words echoed through popular memory, "My sword is long, but my shadow is longer." And that shadow, the text says, fell across Europe when the tomb was opened. Another chilling incident is described in leaked Soviet interrogation notes. A local worker tried to steal a ring from the finger of the remains and was struck by violent convulsions, losing speech entirely. He muttered incoherent phrases about burning horses charging toward him. The ring itself was said to be made from a corrosion-resistant metal, set with red agate engraved with symbols of dominion over the 4 directions. When Gerasimov first illuminated the face after 500 years, Witnesses said the eyes were not fully closed. They appeared fixed on the ceiling, creating a sense that the dead ruler was still watching. Historical sources mention that Timur burial garments were saturated with arsenic to prevent decomposition. This caused mild poisoning symptoms among those who handled the remains without protection. Meanwhile, Samarkand was filled with unrest. Some claimed they saw the shadow of the commander moving across the minarets of Registan at night. When the remains were brought to Moscow, they were placed in a sealed hall beneath the Academy of Sciences. Guards refused to stand alone in the corridors leading to the laboratory. Lights reportedly shut off by themselves whenever someone tried to film the skull. Optical experts later found no fault in the cameras or lenses. After the reburial and the end of the war, authorities built a reinforced concrete barrier separating Timur's tomb from nearby graves. This was meant to prevent any vibration or disturbance from reaching his chamber. Chemical analysis of the soil revealed unusually high concentrations of rare metals. These materials were not native to Uzbekistan and had been brought from Persia and India to honor the ruler whose empire once spanned them. Kayumov wrote that the aircraft returning the coffin shook violently despite calm weather. He believed the spirit resisted returning until a heavy price was paid. Recently released documents say Stalin kept Gerasimov drawing of Timur's face in his private office during the Battle of Berlin. Some believe he drew strength from it. Others believe he feared forgetting the favor that brought victory. The curse remained alive in folklore as a warning to rulers who believe power grants the right to disturb history. Timur, the story insists, remained king in death as he was in life, guarding his realm through silence. Gerasimov's fame came at a cost. In his final years he lived in near isolation, telling close students that the eyes of the bust followed him across the room. Secret party archives claim Stalin ordered the destruction of all cigarettes and papers that touched the remains. He feared the spread of an unknown contamination, physical or otherwise. Scientists also found rare fungi on the skull that survived extreme environments and chemicals. No explanation was ever agreed upon. Researchers later said the decision to rebury was not purely military. It came after reports of electromagnetic disturbances recorded directly above the mausoleum. In modern times, the Uzbek government installed laser protection and heat sensors around the tomb. Access to the true burial chamber is forbidden to any researcher, regardless of rank. Manuscripts studied by Ivan Kovalev mention a mythical stone buried with Timur, said to grant influence over human minds. This belief led German archaeologists to attempt infiltration before the war, but Soviet security stopped them. Kayumov spoke in his last days of seeing armored figures along the road when returning from Samarkand. He believed Timur returned not alone, but with all the spirits disturbed by the act. Genetic studies on remaining samples suggested unusual physical traits in Timur lineage. These traits may explain their effectiveness in night warfare. The curse, the text says, is a reminder that history is not dead matter. It is a living force that can explode when handled without respect. Until wars cease, the Gur Emir Mausoleum will stand as a silent witness. It reminds humanity that some locks must never be broken, no matter how tempting science may find them. The reburial ceremony in November 1942 was not merely technical. It was a collective spiritual ritual involving engineers, soldiers, and disguised religious figures. Stalin ordered communal prayers, and recitations for 3 days and nights around the tomb. The aim was to appease forces believed to have turned against them. Guards reported hearing thunder from beneath the ground during the burial, despite clear skies. At the same time, Hitler sent secret telegrams warning of unnatural Soviet resistance at Stalingrad. The German leader did not know that the Soviets had performed what they believed to be a reconciliation with the spirit of the conqueror. They sought protection against the modern invader. Gerasimov coated the restored skull with special wax to protect it from moisture. The remains were placed inside a new steel box before being returned to the original stone coffin. Digital talismans carved into the walls were repainted with special substances. They were meant to endure for thousands of years as guardians of the land. After sealing the tomb, 2 meters of concrete were poured over the secret entrance. The people of Samarkand felt immediate relief, as if a heavy cloud had lifted. Heavy rain fell on the surrounding desert that night. Many saw it as a sign of acceptance. Scientific work continued on plaster casts of the skull in Moscow. The original was never touched again. Documents say a gold plate engraved with a world map was found beneath Timur's feet. It showed trade and war routes yet to come, and its images were studied in secret institutes for decades. Victor Sarianidi said the curse was not superstition, but a geopolitical reality exploding at a critical moment. It remains central to understanding the link between ancient power and modern catastrophe. As the tomb closed, rumors spread through the Kremlin that Stalin dreamed of a warrior of fire pointing toward Moscow. This dream, the text says, finally broke his ideological resistance. Manuscripts once held by the 3 elders were later traced to a hidden monastery near the Tian Shan Mountains. They contained timelines linking Timur life to events of the 20th century. During the final sealing, restorers discovered a hidden chamber behind the mosque niche. Inside were mirrors made from a metal that never rusted, arranged to reflect moonlight toward the skull. This system was believed to feed the spirit with cosmic energy. It also explained the extraordinary preservation of the remains. Afterward, Stalin classified everything found as top secret. No scientific paper was allowed to discuss biological findings from the tomb. Decades later, Gerasimov requested permission to re-examine preserved samples. The state refused, warning that reopening the past could lead to nuclear catastrophe. Some technicians involved later suffered unexplained accidents. The commander, they said, had not allowed them to forget. Kayumov tried filming the mausoleum exterior years later. His camera repeatedly failed near the main door. Studies confirmed Timur's helmet was forged from rare Damascus steel. It became a symbol of endurance in Uzbek national memory. Soviet intelligence reports describe strange figures appearing in photographs taken in the laboratory. Shadows of ancient warriors stood behind the scientists, though no one else was present. Experts in optics found no technical explanation. The images remained classified. Samarkand experienced unusual lightning strikes at the mausoleum peak. This happened even in clear weather. Stalin ordered the installation of hidden monitoring devices to detect any energy emission. He feared Timur left behind a spiritual weapon. Ancient Tashkent sources say underground channels made of black magnetic stone ran beneath the city. They were designed to drain negative energy from the tomb. During the Cold War, foreign leaders secretly visited the site. Among them were figures from Asia and the Arab world who reported overwhelming fear. Visitors were forbidden from touching the marble. Locals believed body heat could awaken the curse. Secret manuscripts spoke of ancient chemistry used on Timur's shroud. These substances reacted with oxygen to cause hallucinations. This may explain some visions, but it never explained the precise timing of the Nazi invasion. Kayumov died believing the event was a collision of eras, not science alone. After Soviet collapse, the mausoleum was restored with gold decoration and elite protection. It became a place of prayer and fear. Some say blue light emerges between marble seams at spring equinox. Observers hear rhythmic sounds like a giant heartbeat. These legends strengthen Timur's image as a figure beyond time. Before his death, Gerasimov made a final journey to Samarkand, seeking forgiveness. He stood before the blue dome, whispering words no one understood. He later said astrologers from the Levant and China advised Timur on the burial site. They believed it was a convergence point of Earth energy. Architectural records show the foundation contained layers of copper and silver. This acted as a spiritual lightning rod. Stalin studied these designs for use in Moscow skyscrapers. He was fascinated by their power. During Gerasimov's last visit, he smelled the same incense beneath the concrete. It was a message that preservation and the curse still slept. Kayumov lived to 100, believing the war ended not only by arms. It ended by an unspoken pact between Timur's spirit and Russia. Recent geophysical studies detected sound waves from inside the tomb at sunset. They resembled ancient war drums. No scientific explanation has been agreed upon. Local belief holds that Timur Council still gathers below. Sources claim Timur's original sword was moved to a secure palace location. It is said to reveal enemy intent. Gerasimov died in 1970. In his desk was found the warning inscription copied in many languages. He had calculated letter values and found they matched the timing of the first atomic bomb. This terrified those who saw his notes. The curse stands as a lesson for rulers. Power does not grant the right to disturb the dead. Sometimes ignorance of the past is the only path to survival. And Timur, resting on his stone bed, understands this well. UNESCO later classified the Gur Emir mausoleum as a World Heritage Site. Special rules forbid deep radar scanning to avoid disturbing the chemical balance. Experts warned that vibrations could release trapped gases. These gases were not ordinary poisons. The fate of the three elders remained a mystery. Security agencies never found their identities. Kayumov believed they were spiritual guardians. They appeared only when great danger approached. A manuscript later found near China contained star maps of the future. One elder was last seen walking into the desert without footprints. The book location remains known only to a few monks. They believe opening it would end the world. Today the mausoleum blends prayer and fear. Visitors feel the weight of air near the stone coffins. The curse of Timur proves the earth remembers its kings. Science may stand helpless before the secrets of soul and grave. The Soviet expedition ended physically, but its echo still beats in Samarkand. The buried commander still watches. History listens. And now, what do you think about the curse of Timur and its link to the Second World War? Was it a true curse and prophecy, or a strange historical coincidence? Write your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you for listening.